yet.
That's Hamashita, right? Hello, good to see you.
Hello.
This is our ANHN founder.
Founder, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Where are you, Professor Hamashita?
Good morning, Hamashita.
Can you hear us? Hamashita, can you hear me? We can hear. Can you switch on so that we could hear from Hamashita? Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in Tokyo.
Can we bring in the voice of Professor Hamashita, please? The control room, please.
我们有他的那个 CV 没有？
Hello? Can
没有。
is there somebody? Can we allow his voice to come in? Hamashita, can you allow us to hear you? He's the only person who's had chair professors of Tokyo and Kyoto on East Asian and Southeast Asian studies.
Okay.
He and 5 other members founded the ANHN with me 20 years ago.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Not-
but what's wrong with?
Yeah, the voice. The soundtrack. We could, can
Yeah,
he?
I can hear him
I think
speak very
he
well.
has to speak. He's the open speaker, huh?
I can hear.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear him as well.
We
Yeah.
can hear him, but in the very very low tone.
I
Yeah.
see. So I need to put on the earphone, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's start.
Indeed. In that case, can you just pass your time to Professor Xiong to introduce Japanese professor, because we don't have his CV. Okay. Yeah. After your introduction, then pass to the Professor Xiong to introduce him.
Should I invite Professor Zhang to give an opening remark first or introduce the Japanese scholar first?
But I don't know. Din Zhang know him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. We are not so informal, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Is Changquan on already?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Changqian is there. Check. Yeah. Just wait a minute. Yeah. Harold is in.
Yes.
Okay.
Howard-san. Right.
I'm here ready anytime you want me.
Hey, 院长，你敢回起来？
Can you control this time? What this is going to? You don't have to allow it back up. So we will be running, but when you see it go off, you just need to open. 89911.
So you want me to time or what do you want?
No. When you see this, then this, 89912.
Let's see if you want the what am I looking for here? What do you-
Good morning in Asia zone and good evening in USA and Canada zone. Let's start our meeting today. Today's theme will be evolution of culture after COVID-19 pandemics. In the first of this conference, let's welcome Professor Zheng Xiong to introduce our distinguished guest from Japan. Please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all, and good evening to Harold. This is the third online meeting that ANHN, together with SHIPSH, is presenting with our host, National Taiwan University College of Public Health, led by Dean Zhang Changquan and Associate Dean Tony Chen Xiuxi. I have the greatest pleasure to welcome Professor Hamashita joining us for the first time. I have the request from many local scholars and especially students to want to recognize you and acknowledge your great contribution to Asian and global humanities. I don't have Professor Hamashita's distinguished long CV with me. Let me just share with you a few highlights. Professor Hamashita, when he's young, he's a very, very brave and outspoken student leader, like many of you here in the room earlier in his career. His specialty is in Chinese studies, East Asian studies, but then move on to Southeast Asian studies. I knew him first when he was visiting regularly with the Institute of Modern History in Academia Sinica, and then we, together with 5-6 leaders of the Asian Pacific, founded the Asian New Humanities Net. If I were to have time to show you the PPT I prepared to introduce ANHN's relations with SHIPSH, you'll be able to see Hamashita with us 20 years ago and on later. He is the only person I know of who has held professorial positions at Tokyo University and Keio University. His position in Tokyo University is with East Asian Studies and Chinese Studies, and then he moved on to Kyoto University as a chair in Southeast Asian Studies. He had made many, many groundbreaking academic discoveries, including his latest thesis that the ocean should be treated like deserts, not as barriers to historical developments, but as highways that lead to connections and developments. His works are too many to cite, but another interesting thing I want to point out is that after he temporarily finished his temporary positions in Japan, he moved on to mainland China, created the Asian Pacific College in the Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, and then he continues to publish the leading journal in Asian studies in Japanese, well, in English, published in Japan. His help to us and his friendship and his support is too numerous for me to cite here. I simply, wanted to have you getting to know Professor Hamashita, who comes to Taipei regularly, and you could treat him to a good coffee house next time when he comes. Hamashita, do you want to greet everybody with a word or two?
Thank you very much. I wonder whether my mic doesn't work, but I can recognize all of you. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's good. Thanks.
Thank you. And let's welcome Professor Changquan Zhang to give us an opening remark.
Yeah, good evening, dear friends from mostly United States, and good morning for participants from Asia. I'm Changquan Zhang, the former dean of College of Public Health, National Taiwan University. And this is last sessions of our series on COVID-19, Health and Humanities. And today we are going to talk about cultures. And as we have observed over the pandemic, the way humankind react to virus shed a light on how people living in different countries behaviors towards the virus, especially when we are talking about non-pharmaceutical interventions, which include like social distancing, wearing masks, hand hygiene, etc. All these basic behaviors has a lot of cultural contents there. For example, in Taiwan, the majority of people are wearing masks. So when we read or watch TVs, knowing about that Americans have such a cultural wars on wearing masks. A lot of people just didn't understand, and this is quite important and interesting issues to us. Even wearing the mask has such a culture's metaphors there. So I think there's others attributes of these pandemics on cultures. So I'm very anxious to learn from our experts today to share with us your perspectives on issues related to 19 and health and humanities. Thanks again for your participating, and look forward to this successful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are going to invite Professor Xiu Xichen to introduce one distinguished guest from the USA. Please.
Hello, Bob. Bob? Bob? Robert Smith? Bob is... Are you with us?
It does not seem to unmute.
Hi, Bob. Yeah. Yeah, good evening. Let me introduce our new guest. He's a director of the cancer screening in the American Cancer Society. He has been involved in cancer prevention as epidemiology role, and also some of the leadership role in cancer and chronic disease prevention. I think he's the first time to join with our the online meeting on health humanities, which would will be very helpful for our planning in health humanity in the future. So Bob, welcome, and I hope you can join with our roundtable discussion after the two speech. Okay, thank you so much again, and can you just say hello to all of us? Yeah.
Yes, it seems if I hold the space bar down, I'm unmuted. But thank you very much, Tony, for the introduction, and it's very nice to be with you all here tonight.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you and welcome all the distinguished guests again. And now we're moving on to our first topics of today. The first speech will be delivered by Professor Haller Schussen on the topic of culture and technology after COVID-19. Professor Haller is from Beihang University, and now he is a professor in the East China University of Science and Technology of China, and also the professor of industry of philosophy of technology and global ethics, Polytechnics Institute of New York University of USA. Let's welcome Professor Haller.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Ping Chen. Very honored to be here this evening, and special greetings to our distinguished surprise guests, these to me. I'm glad that you're joining us, and I hope that what I have to offer will contribute to the larger discussion. I'm going to talk from the perspective of a humanist, of which philosophy is an example. But although I will refer to some historically important philosophical figures and positions, I'm not going to present a philosophical analysis or argument. Rather, I am going to try to address the general question of how might the humanities contribute to our understanding of the many challenges and threats associated with COVID-19. The one question we all have, what will the future be like? Will we go back to the world we knew not so long ago? Probably not. Or will we inherit a new kind of society? Will cultural norms be radically different? What will technology have done? And for what will we use it? In short, can the humanities help us get through this? And what should we look forward to? Next slide, please. COVID-19 is a global threat, a threat to all humanity in the present and in future generations. When the atomic bomb was first tested, one of its creators, upon seeing the blast and quoting the Bhagavad Gita, lamented the unthinkable horror that had been unleashed by human technology.
Sorry, Harold, can you, can you try to speak closer to the mic so that we could hear you more clearly? And we're recording your voice too.
Yeah. So I was just saying that COVID-19 is a global threat to all humanity. When we first observed the testing of the atomic bomb, it was greeted with the fear and horror that we had unleashed a kind of devastation and potentially horrible power that we wouldn't know how to handle. But it wasn't too long after that, then we began to accept it and live with it. And in the words of Dr. Strangelove, how I learned to stop worrying and drop the bomb. So this is kind of the theme that I want to address. Next slide, please. What can we look forward to? What can we anticipate? In the 18th century, David Hume, questioning the ability of science to make predictions, argued that our assumed knowledge of the future is only an expectation based on the regularity of past experience. Beyond that, we can't know the future. What we can do is hope. Now, my title suggests that some knowledge of what will transpire after the cessation of COVID-19 pandemic. But such knowledge I cannot claim lay any claim to. And not only for the ordinary reasons that make the future unknowable. So I cannot pretend to answer our question, which past will the future resemble? The best I can do is to suggest what we can learn from the humanities and hope that this work might lead us to a better future. Next slide, please. I find the writings of my teacher, Hannah Arendt, still useful, and they seem to address the pressing issues of today. In the prologue to The Human Condition, which was first published in 1958, Arendt described the launch of Sputnik in 1957 as an event second in importance to no other, not even the splitting of the atom. In the last section of the book, Arendt narrated the rise of Earth alienation. Earth alienation, the sense of not feeling at home in the world, is an aspect of the restraints of the coronavirus as well. We cannot be part of the world. The two citations that she uses at the beginning of her book called Between Past and Future, from René Char and Franz Kafka, show our feelings of displacement in time as well as space, and they fittingly characterize our time. René Char shortly, reflecting on the experience of the French being a part of the French resistance during the Second World War, said, "Our heritage is given to us by no testament." And then she quotes this fascinating little parable by Kafka, picturing an individual on a tightrope. He has two antagonists. The first presses him from behind, from the origin. The second blocks the road ahead. He gives battle to both. To be sure, the first supports him in his fight with the second, for he wants to push him forward. And in the same way, the second supports him in his fight with the first, since he drives him back. But it is only theoretically so, for it is not only the two antagonists who are there, but he himself as well. And who really knows his intentions? His dream, though, is that sometime in an unguarded moment, and this would require a night darker than any night that has ever yet been, he will jump out of the fighting line and be promoted on account of his experience in fighting to position of umpire over his antagonists in the fight with each other. So this maybe is one aspect of the human condition, or how we are caught between past and future, where the past has not taught us sufficiently and the future is unknown. Next slide, please. So it's as though we're in a state of limbo. This idea of limbo captures the feeling that I think Arendt and through René Char and Kafka was alluding to. The term limbo is frequently applied today to situations where death is prolonged, as for example, when someone is left in a coma or in a vegetative state, in a sense, neither alive nor dead. Dante's limbo, technically the first circle of hell, includes virtuous non-Christian adults. That is, it is inclusive. It includes all of humanity. Virtuous non-Christian adults, unbaptized infants, and we also find here many of the great heroes, thinkers, and creative minds of ancient Greece and Rome, as well as the medieval non-Christians, Saladin or the Sultan of Egypt in the late 12th century, and the great Islamic philosophers Avicenna and Averroes. Next slide, please. The kind of experience of loss, isolation, alienation, fear, and uncertainty that is the context of COVID-19 is not new. Indeed, humanity has known it since antiquity. But what are the lessons of the past? As Hunter Gardner has observed, they're not easy to extract. Professor Gardner says, "I don't know what to do with the idea of the plague when it's not a metaphor." He says, "I was experienced the kind of paralysis that comes when, without much warning, the stuff of literary fantasy jumps into the realm of brutal reality." Now, this is a sub-theme of mine. What are we as humanists getting from our devotion to the masterpieces of literature and philosophy and history and so on that we study and know and which enrich us and expand our lives, when all of a sudden the subjects of those works suddenly become the reality that we're living with? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We have all been painfully aware, this has been mentioned, I think, in each one of the online meetings that we have had on this general topic of coping with the COVID-19. We have all been painfully aware that coinciding with the pandemic, there's been a precipitous rise in expressions of ethnic and racial animosity. Martin Luther King maintained that as human culture advanced on so many fronts, especially technologically, the moral requirements of living together have not shown any improvement. With racism and ethnic scapegoating that has accompanied COVID-19, one points that Martin Luther King made in his famous I Have a Dream speech seem pertinent today. Through our scientific and technological genius, we've made this world a neighborhood. And now through our moral and ethical commitment, we must make it a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. When we look at modern man, we have to face the fact that modern man suffers from a kind of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to a scientific and technological abundance. We've learned to fly in the air like birds, we've learned to swim in the seas like fish, and yet we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. This sounds like an indictment of the humanities, or at least the indictment of humanities education, or the lessons we were able to take from humanities learning into our daily lives and our relationships with others. Next slide, please. Camus' famous novel, La Peste, or The Plague, about an episode of bubonic plague in the Algerian city of Oran, a French port on the coast of Algeria, is presented as the diary of an anonymous individual who turns out, we learn at the end of the novel, is actually one of the city's physicians. And it describes the growing sense of malaise, acceptance, despair, and courage, the last virtue seemingly the one most needed and most difficult to achieve and sustain. And of course, courage did not mean brute force to fight the plague. Indeed, it was a kind of resignation, but rather the ability to keep the faith, but not faith in God to save us, but faith that enables us to be true to ourselves. It was first published in 1947. It was originally understood as an allegory about fascism, but the story strikes us now in a more literal light. The infectious disease no longer represents Nazi occupation of France, as it did for many of its first readers, but simply another infectious disease, COVID-19. But it is only very recently that the book is seen as a kind of spiritual manual for the pandemic. Camus himself saw the plague as a metaphor, especially for Nazism, but for violent foreign invasions in general. Of course, given the French occupation of Algeria and the fact that all of the characters in the book are European, generated a fair amount of controversy and criticism. As a literary artifact, it reinforces the analogy between war and plague. So there are 3 points, I think. One is the analogy that we almost by nature draw between war and combat and dealing with the plague is very powerful. Secondly, there's a kind of spirituality that perhaps the humanities can offer. What the poet Stephen Spender, in his review in the New York Times, pointed out. Don't read this book as fiction. Don't condemn it for moralizing. The plague stands or falls by this kind of message. So this is, in a way, the opposite view from Hunter Gardner, who looked at literature and said, I don't know what to do. It's paralyzing. Stephen Spender is suggesting, and now many people suggest, that literature can give us a sense to develop the sort of moral courage, maybe the sort that Martin Luther King was speaking of. Next slide, please. So, of course, wars result in injury and death, the destruction of infrastructure, and the suspension or cessation and refocus of activities. The pandemic is doing something similar. The regrouping of culture on all levels is a post-war phenomenon. It is not the return to pre-war culture, and one can hardly expect our post-pandemic, if indeed we have such a period, we cannot expect our post-pandemic culture simply to continue with what we had been familiar with. What do we have to look forward to? I'm saying, well, we can't know the future, but we can know that it's going to be a different future. Next slide, please. So a young professor at the University of Philosophy at the University of Chicago, Agnes Collard, has written a very interesting piece on how we respond. We humanists, or in particular philosophers like herself, how do we respond in the face of COVID-19? She wrote, "The coronavirus is, for the vast majority of us, a call to inaction. It puts life on pause, diminishes our place in the world, and forces us to turn inward, to numbness or anxiety. Are these our choices?" The humanities point to another possibility. Aristotle distinguished between relaxation, that kind of leisure, which is when we take a rest from activity with a view to resuming that activity, and true leisure, schole. Of course, the word reminds us of the word for scholarship, which is inaction meant for a higher purpose, for theory or contemplation. How is this solution helpful? Is it healthy? Is it beneficial to more than the individual? Next slide, please. Before addressing the question of the virus directly, Collard raises the more general issue of the utility of the humanities in times of great crisis or malaise, what Hannah Arendt calls dark times. Collard asks, what is the role of Aristotle or the person who studies him in a crisis? But then she at once cites a very pessimistic counterexample. Perhaps the most pessimistic answer to this question can be found in the essays of Jean Amory, an Austrian Jew born Hans Mayer, who wrote movingly of how his own humanistic learning failed him during the Second World War. Faced with the sheer physical brutality of the concentration camps, Amory came to see the intellectual life as a game, and intellectuals as nothing more than people playing. He compared himself unfavorably to those prisoners who had a political or religious cause to cling to, Marxists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, practicing Jews. Being part of a larger struggle made them unshakable, calm, strong, he wrote. Their cause served as a kind of substratum, which made life during the camps continuous with life before and after it. Whereas people like himself, humanists, philosophers, skeptics, fell into despair and in the face of atrocity, no longer believed in the reality of the world of the mind. Now, this is a very disquieting and disturbing perspective on the kind of strength we might hope to derive from the humanities. Next slide, please. So here is Collard's own point, and it's a very limited kind of point, I think. She said, being the beneficiary of a much gentler crisis, that is, her crisis, much gentler by comparison than his, my vision is less distorted. I have never been more sure of the value of schole, the power of dedicating your time to a higher calling, than now, when I cannot and wish I could. Some of the best things are delicate. The fact that they can be crushed is not an argument against their value, but one in favor of providing them with protective enclosures. Yes, it is possible to spin the straw of empty time into gold, but such a pursuit requires many supports. I can teach you to see something in the abstruse arguments against atomism and Aristotle's on the generation and corruption, to become excited by them, even engaged by ancient physics. But things need to be just right. I need a physical classroom, a blackboard, a set of students I have spent a quarter to getting to know, I need the world outside to stay quiet. The fact that current circumstances impair that setting is not a refutation of philosophy. It is proof of how much effort we should put into getting things back to normal so that we can once again help each other see the world of the mind for the beautiful, wondrous place it is. So it's through a glass darkly, seeing the resource of the humanities, but not being able to touch it. That's how she characterizes the time of the COVID virus. Next slide, please. The Stoics had a different view. Things do not touch the soul. Marcus Aurelius said, our perturbations come only from the opinion which is within. In other words, it's under our control to sustain the life of the mind and to have the strengths that philosophy and the humanities offer. But I want to sort of juxtapose this with a comment from the novel by Ding Ling, The Diary of Miss Sophie. Near the beginning of that, Sophie, who is in a sanatorium for tuberculosis, reports the doctor saying to her, the doctor says it would be better if I had plenty of sleep and plenty of food and didn't read and didn't think. Didn't read and didn't think. Is this what medicine is teaching? She goes on, but of course that's impossible. I never get to sleep before 2 or 3. I wake up before dawn. Windy days like this make you think of too many disturbing things. Besides, you can't get out when it's blowing hard. And what can you do stuck in your room with no books to read? I can't just sit here by myself doing nothing and waiting for the time to go by, wishing the winter would pass quicker. So Agnes Callard says we need to retain our belief in the humanities, and this itself will give us a kind of resource. Stoics like Marcus Aurelius say, we have it. We don't need to get back to we have it if we can only access it. And Ding Ling portrays a much stronger assault on the resources offered by the humanities when you are in a period of isolation and physical and mental distress. Next slide, please. Anyway, maybe it's not what our time is about. Maybe people are not reading and reflecting. Maybe the life of the mind in that form is not what most people want or need. What is it? Problem solving? Surrogate battles? This op-ed recently from the New York Times. People aren't reading or watching movies or narratives or stories. They're gaming. During the pandemic, digital three-dimensional environments are where much of life is taking place. I take 2 points from this. One, the sort of disregard of the kind of reflective, contemplative way of approaching the things that are characteristic of the humanities, in replacing it with going to have an outcome, yes or no, that you win a game or you lose a game, you solve the problem or the problem is there to be solved. Point one. Point two, undeniable, I think, point two, that the role and importance of digital technology is growing by leaps and bounds. This kind of meeting that we're having, this kind of conference, of course, is an example of that. Next slide, please. Now, both biologists and historians have taught us something about this kind of experience. The book by William McNeill, Peoples and Plagues, a groundbreaking book, argues that political, economic, history, history in the sense that history basically always had been told, is not sufficient to tell the whole story. Battles, he points out, may have been won or lost not because of military strength or technique or strategy, but because of other factors such as the effects of plagues. He gives the example of the Spanish conquest of Mexico. The evolutionary biologist, Ernst Mayr, offers, I think, a complementary lesson to us when he points out that evolution is something which involves the interaction of organisms with all of the other organisms and all of the environment around us. Evolution is not something which is just the descent of species, but evolution is the evolution of populations and evolution in a sense of culture, tool making, technological discoveries have impacted the progress and direction of evolution. So historians like McNeill have noted how plagues have profoundly altered the course of affairs and the structures of society. The evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr has argued that Darwin's theory of evolution of all life by common descent, behavioral and genetic variation, and natural selection challenged the Western cultural intellectual traditions. Will the global pandemic, if it endures, challenge the consensus values of global civilization? Next slide, please. I did a search on PubMed, which is medical records and journals and articles, and found this reference to the McNeill book, the article called Plagues and Peoples Revisited makes a very elegant point from the standpoint of medical practice. Plagues and peoples are inextricably linked. Social, cultural, and political factors are all major contributions to such diverse events as ecosystem change, urbanization, as well as poverty, inequality, gender relations, and many other factors are decisive issues in the transmission of infectious diseases, and that epidemics are both social and biological events. I read this in light of the I Have a Dream speech. Yes, social and biological events and medical events and economic events and so on and so forth are all inextricably tied together. All of them influence each other. Next slide, please. So, a question about humanities education and how it's been going. Humanities education, in this case, following the path of the social sciences, following the path of all education. Does the specialization of knowledge, as we know it today, help or hinder our ability to comprehend and respond to pandemics? The COVID-19 pandemic is global in its reach, but seems to be somewhat selective regarding divisions based on class, wealth, ethnicity, and race. This suggests we need to have economists, we need to have sociologists, we need to have various types of social scientists in collaboration with biological scientists and medical scientists. But I want to ask, who should address this polyvalent crisis? What kind of knowledge should guide us? Should it be epidemiology, statistics, computer modeling, sociology, economics, political theory, medicine or pharmacy, engineering, molecular biology, evolutionary biology? just reflecting on that list, it's not hard to understand why so many different and possibly incompatible suggestions and solutions and programs may be proposed. What kind of systems approach can we devise? And my question, what role should the humanities take? These questions are particularly vexing. The associations of pandemics with war, with eschatology, and therefore with honor, status, the purpose of life, all of these associations and analogies and metaphorical allusions conspire in diverse formula to magnify the ongoing social problems and ethical crises. Let's reflect on a few of them. Next slide, please. Now, one issue really stands out. It's embedded in war and battle metaphors. It's brought out explicitly by Martin Luther King. It's namely our feeling in one form or another that it's not fair. And we ask who or what is to blame? Do we resolve this as a good and evil paradigm, or how do we approach it? John Rawls wrote a very famous book and several journal articles, and revised the book after it generated much discussion, devoted to trying to explore the idea of justice as fairness. In his highly influential writings, he did argue, one, that the fundamental idea in the concept of justice is fairness. The fundamental idea in the concept of justice is fairness, but this is not easy or simple. He argues that classical utilitarianism, I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, is not well suited to creating this form of justice. And he also points out that justice is itself not the same as an all-inclusive good society. So what are we looking for, and what do we need? The distribution of the virus and its unpredictable severity, together with the unequal availability of protective equipment and care facilities, income protection, and other forms of security, has put the issue of fairness at the heart of our efforts to understand COVID-19. Next slide, please. So I'm saying it's a task of the humanities to at least try to understand what justice is and to portray it. Where do we look? We might look to government, business, medicine, science to guarantee that the virus does not keep us from our freedoms and thus limit fairness and constrain our rights and privileges. In other words, all of these institutions and influential practices have something to do with it. But I think that it is the primary activity of the humanities, of literature and philosophy, to understand what justice is and to portray it. Religion does this, of course, but religion also adds prescriptions as to what justice is. And as we heard in the previous session, different religions approach this in very different ways. Yet history points out that justice is not always in control of humankind. And as we have seen from Professor Gardner, Professor Collard, as well as John Rawls, even understanding justice within the invisibility of a pandemic can easily lead to feelings of inadequacy and hopelessness. So I'm going to just quickly run through a few famous viewpoints in the humanities. So we'll begin with Homer. Next slide, please. So scholars have noted that what we might call the objective or external aspect of happiness, or the good life, and I mentioned the Homeric words that evoke that meaning, are in both the Iliad and the Odyssey overwhelmingly used by the gods and are mainly and perhaps properly with the gods. Indeed, in the Homeric world, our happiness or satisfaction with our station in life is contingent upon the gods. When the words are used of humans, they have connotations to the divine sphere, implying ease and security and might. Old Bios belongs to the human sphere and has connotations above all towards prosperity, being well off. So the Homeric approach makes us in a way dependent on the gods smiling on us. Next slide, please. For Aristotle, politics has a function of developing the health of the soul. The well-being of the human soul in part has to do with the healthy functioning of the organs of the body, and partly to do with the correctness of thinking by the rational part of the soul. The health of the body is essential to the health, that is, happiness of the soul. Isolation and the absence of interaction with friends in the pursuit of skole both strains our ability to be happy and threatens the health of the soul. That is our health, body and soul. This is a large point. Aristotle says the best exercises and food produce a good condition of the body. And a good condition of the body enables people to do the best work. Therefore, virtue too is a sort of disposition generated by the best movements in the soul and the source of the best functions and emotions of the soul. Both virtue and vice have to do with pleasant and painful, where punishments are medical remedies and, like other remedies, operate by opposites. In this case, the opposites of pleasure and pain. So the kind of deprivation and the kind of discomfort and the kind of numbness and frustration and anxiety that the experience of the COVID may be causing in many, Aristotle sees as a kind of punishment that may work in a way to strengthen the soul and lead to ultimate eudaimonia of the soul. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned great Chinese second China philosopher Mencius. According to Mencius, human dignity is the quality that human beings have as humans. This is what sets humanity apart from others. This concept is actually similar to a Roman concept, which that is what is most truly human, is what lies at the core of the concept of acting humanely. So this imposes a moral duty to see ourselves and other people as belonging to a common humanity, sharing the same category of human beings. As such, it requires a recognition of more than a biological category. It requires an acknowledgement of the particular worth of the human and thus sets a distinctive limit to our will as autonomous agents and choice makers. It expresses respect and value. Its demands are directed to the dead and the living, as well as to those who are yet to be born. So Mencius, in a kind of cosmological way, is evoking the moral, political, social well-being of people as helping identify what it truly means to be human. Next slide, please. We go back to the Stoics. This is Epictetus, and it's a little bit different than the impression we may have gotten from Marcus Aurelius and kind of popular Stoicism. The Stoics held that emotions like fear and envy, or impassioned sexual attachments, or passionate love, or of anything actually, were or arose from false judgments. The sage would not undergo them. Indeed, the sage is utterly immune to misfortune, and that virtue is sufficient for happiness, and that only the sage is free, while all others are slaves. And paradoxically, those who are morally vicious are equal in this sense to the sages. Next slide, please. Consolations of Philosophy, Boethius. This is a book which imagines a dialogue between philosophy, personified as a woman, and Boethius, who is in prison awaiting execution, and what are the consolations of philosophy. Boethius in the book says he's utterly confused, dejected by a sudden change of fortune. Philosophy's first job is to console, but not by offering sympathy, but by showing that Boethius has no good reason to complain. True happiness, philosophy wishes to argue, is not damaged even by the sort of disaster Boethius has experienced, which is also a wider objective, to show that it is not the case, as Boethius the character claims, that the wicked prosper and the good are oppressed. So this is kind of a latter form of Stoicism. It's influenced by Christianity, and it is the promise of the life to come. And for that reason, you can tolerate even the most severe punishments. Next slide, please. Existentialism, especially in the West, but not only so, seems to capture the spirit of what it means to be human, in the sense of the human condition. The 19th century melancholy Dane Søren Kierkegaard is often regarded as the founder of existentialism, as he thematized the existing individual. But individualism, of course, may be associated with the reticence of some to embrace measures taken for the common good, and which may demand individual sacrifice. So existentialism, maybe the most modern of the philosophies, seems to be swimming in the opposite direction from the kind of communitarian notions that we've seen in previous philosophers. Also, the avoidance of anxiety was not Kierkegaard's forte. We were to embrace that with rigor. Kierkegaard described what he called 3 stages along life's way. Each of these was a paradigmatic model of a possible attempt to achieve the good life, happiness and satisfaction for the individual. Each stage represents an approach to everyday living and a philosophical worldview. They're dialectically related, and in ascending order, they are what he calls the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. In the aesthetic, one pursues what is exciting, interesting, and beautiful in the hope of finding meaning, which nonetheless remains elusive, and the aesthetic approach is defeated by boredom. The ethical is the dialectical opposite of the aesthetic, a stolid and unvarying adherence to duty. One's actions are guided by obligation more than choice. The religious, culminating eventually in the leap of faith in the power of the absurd, argues that the radical abandonment of individual purpose yields a true redemption of the individual and the meaning of life. So it's almost a kind of will to power, a kind of decisive appropriation of what is given and the accepting of one's condition, honestly. Next slide, please. Utilitarianism is important because it suggests a calculative approach and therefore seems to some more objective than other approaches. The methods of the social sciences seem to fit with utilitarianism. Textbooks in business ethics and engineering ethics elaborate varieties of utilitarian consequentialism almost exclusively. Rawls found classical utilitarianism inadequate, as the ethical basis for a society based on justice is fairness. And utilitarianism has been tinkered with many times, and there are many theoretical refinements by philosophers, economists, political theorists, and so on. Yet, its basic tenet still guides many in their actions. In periods of crisis, when all seems up for grabs, a practical yardstick to measure the appropriateness of action seems to be the utilitarian maxim. That is, act in a way that the consequences of your actions produce more benefit than harm, more pleasure than pain. Of course, knowing the consequences is a problem, and what I regard as benefit, you may not regard as benefit, and so on. But if the calculations were possible, this approach, a kind of cost-benefit analysis, would replace thinking with problem solving and might permit insidious solutions that satisfied the calculation with very little concern for the value of life or human dignity. Next slide, please. So the final one I look at is techno-humanities. And the fourth discontinuity. I think that for many, techno-humanities seems to be the most positive and optimistic approach. They believe we can, aided by technology, of course, do something, and we don't need to suffer. Some, like Steven Pinker, even argue that technology has already done this for us, even if we haven't noticed it. This approach fits with neocon politics and free market economics. Techno-humanities, term that I use it in this way, refers to several recent positions that suggest that traditionally understood, the traditionally understood discontinuity between humans and machines is false. That we, namely humans, are co-evolving with machines in something like actor networks. Human pride or belief in a human superiority or unique status are vestiges of tradition which can no longer sustain us. Individual autonomy, free will, the meaning of life, other artifacts of metaphysics are on this view supplanted by the recognition that the feats of robots and the accomplishments of artificial intelligence have and will continue to outperform the meager accomplishments of human beings. To some, the advent of post-humanism is a reason for optimism. Machines networked with humans can solve the problems that are the legacy of the human dominion: war, pestilence, plague, climate change, ecological collapse. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So philosophy, in the spirit of Socrates, sees its mission to ask questions. Questioning is the real business of philosophy. In this case, I've been true to my philosophical vocation. I leave us with questions. I don't think any of the positions are sufficiently satisfying that we will embrace them and feel that we know how now to live with COVID-19. Questions that I've raised. Is COVID-19 like learning to love the bomb? Will the knowledge of this pandemic change the world? If so, for the better? How should we act, and how can we act when we are caught in a state of limbo? Is the battle against the unseen viral enemy to be fought like a war? Has the experience of mutual suffering led to greater compassion, more empathy, kindness, fairness? The plague, as described by Camus, began and ended. Eventually, life as before, except for the memory of loss, resumed, and religious myth was sustained. What can the humanities do? Is the life of the mind salvific? Is this pandemic a matter of fate, the result of human abuse of nature, a sign of end times? Or is it the stage for a new glorious future of techno-comfort and augmented reality? Does the human condition continue to unfold, or have we come, if not to the end of time, to the final chapter of the story of humanity? Next slide. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Harold Susan. And next, we're moving to our second topic, on the topic of quarantine, isolation, contact tracing, and humanities. Professor Xiuxi Chen is a professor in the Institute of Epidemiology and Preventive Medicine in National Taiwan University. His research field is biostatistics, epidemiology, disease screening, and stochastic process. Let's welcome Professor Chen.
Thank you so much for introduction, and I think I appreciate the speech from Harold, and I know this is a very important for COVID-19 in terms of the philosophy concept and also the revolution after the COVID-19. So I will give you a lecture. Actually, would be complemental with each other between Harold and me, because I have already been involved with Din Zhang about our COVID-19 in the globe and also in the local Taiwan. So I think everybody is very concerned with the quarantine isolations and also the contact traces. And this is related to the, as Harold already said, about value and the the respect and value of the human dignity, So I would like, to use Taiwan example to share experience with all of you about how we suggest that Taiwan, move step by step from original phase until so far. Next slide, please. So I know I think everybody know, until so far, COVID-19 cannot be prevented by available vaccine and also drug. So the only measure we can rely on is the non-pharmaceutical preventions. So in Taiwan, in order to contain the epidemic, so we use very strict border control, and then we have a quarantine for peoples with symptoms and also without symptoms, and of course they will be placed in isolations. In the April meetings and also in June meeting, we already mentioned about the mitigation plans, including personal protection, social distancing, and in relation to cultures. Today, I would like to emphasize on the Taiwan experience in quarantine and also isolation for people, who go into the Taiwan with the border controls, and what's the problem, and how can we use the technical, the advanced technology to cope with the problem in relation to quarantine and isolations. So first of all, quarantine, I think, when I was in epidemiology in infectious disease, I served the civil service in CDC for 2 years. So I have so much experience in hearing people about, particularly for the older people, mentioned about they are very, fearful about the quarantines. Why? Because in the histories, 14th centuries, quarantine, the word derived from the Italy. When they have a plague, they had to be a quarantine, and for 40 days. So historically, from historical viewpoint, the quarantine actually can be divided into two words. It's quarantine and journey. This is an Italy word. So the Italy word actually is 40 days, rather than the 14 days, because at that time they have a plague, So because when the ship, and into the harbor, they have to, they have to be required for quarantine for 40 days, So that's why when all the people mention about the quarantine, they are always show a very, fearful feeling, and their face are just, not very comfortable, which I haven't understand from my previous experience. But in COVID-19, I think a lot of people start to fear about these issues. Not in the initial stage, but until the middle stage and until so far. So this is a history. 40 days is a long days. It's like to restrict people, in a cell. So that's I echo hellos always, So that's why we will come up with an issue about what is a value and also the respect of the human dignities. We had the SARS in 2003, so that's why people in Taiwan, they can be adapted to sometimes to sacrifice, the individual liberties in order to get the benefit for public, harm in terms of the community-acquired infections. But this does not mean every country has the same situation scenarios. But when time goes by, even Taiwan, there are a lot of, I think a lot of the voice start to think about whether we need to stick to quarantine for 14 days, So this is actually my major topic today. And I want everybody to think about that, because I know every country right now try to reopen the borders. So they are faced with the same questions and the same issues. So this is an example from the flu pandemic. So when you have a pandemic preparedness plan, you have to ethical consideration following the 5 principles as usual, as we know about. The fourth consideration is about individual liberties, And also, and of course, because infectious disease will cause a lot of the epidemic, a consequence about the community-acquired infection, to claim the lives. So we have to consider the public harm, how to protect from public, the viewpoint. But the third point is very important. This is why people argue with the quarantine and also isolation, because we have to follow the proportional principles. That means, any restrictive interventions should be only, limited to people who actually had risk, not to the people who's still uncertain about their risk. And this is actually, right now we are thinking about whether technology can cope with these uncertainties. That's why you see the old methods quarantine has been challenged by these principles. And of course, also the privacy is also the related issues when you want to do the contact tracing, after quarantine and also isolations. So in terms of the reciprocal principle, we have to cover the 1 to 4, principle to have pandemic preparedness in order not to violate the value and the respect of human rights. So, next slide, please. So let me show you the initial policy about Taiwanese border control is. They ask the inbound passenger, to report the symptom and sign first. If you have a symptom and sign, of course, the symptom-based test, then you have to be quarantined, and also isolations. Have isolations. I think this is reasonable because, as we say, this is a complete fit in with proportional principle. Because you are, if people infected, and in order to prevent the spread of the infectious disease, so this is reasonable. The second option is if you don't have a symptom and signs, because we don't have available, vaccine and also the drug. So the policy, requests you to have 14 days, quarantines, free of symptoms. And this policy has been implemented after January the Wuhan Huiyan until, so far. So this is actually a quite serious issue right now to raise, because you never be certain about whether these people without symptoms, they are really, been infected. So that's why the quarantine, the quarantine service has been challenged with the ethical considerations by using the principle I just mentioned. And in addition, because you have been requested to have 14 days, and you have to, so the policy also, combined with the contact tracing technicals. So you can see, you use the police system and use the CCTV and use any the ID card to do the contact tracing, and also geospatializations, to monitor the movement of each peoples, even they are at home. So this is actually is related to the privacy and also the legal right people think about. And so this is actually I think the current policy in Taiwan, and I think this is very good for initial stage for balancing between the public health benefit and also individual liberties. But time goes by. Can we have a better message to provide, such kind of the information-based quarantine, the quarantine the policies? Can we do that? I mean, of course. So that's why we think testing is one of the alternative policies to provide. We can know even you are not symptoms at the time you pass by the airport. If you have tested, you can detect them. So once they get positive, then they will be justified quarantines. So this is actually one of the technology they want to use the testing, not only to prevent the spread of the infectious disease, but also consider the individual right about the quarantine, policies. So this is actually one of the things I want to show you. The testing is right now, technology to make, the the COVID-19, the pandemic become become testable and become, detected by the scientific methods. And of course, when you use the technology, then including contact tracing, you use a mobile phone, smartphone. So you need to pay attention to the following. I just, give you my the following presentation for point one by one about how can we avoid the data security, how can you get the individual informed consent, how can we how can we cover the privacy risk? Can we provide, the committee or the council, the counseling for governing, such kind of the new technology in order not to violate ethical principles? And can we have a right to choose option in or option out? Can we use the new, the new informative technology such as blockchain, And of course, has any efforts meant to cover the marginalized populations? So this is all, people come up with idea about how can we use the new technologies to improve, the old quarantine policies. So that's why we urge the government with our dean, for 2 or 3 months to persuade the government to do the policy by providing, the test for people without any symptoms at the airport check-ins. Because if you provide the testings, then you can distinguish those who haven't been infected, but they will turn to symptoms later on. Instead of the quarantine for 14 days, then you can detect them earlier. And of course, you have to sacrifice, because some of them, they are always asymptomatical. They could not be detected by symptoms except using the testing methods. So that's why people argue is, can we leave the asymptomatic alone, in the community, because they are nothing to do with the spread of infection. But this is wrong, because according to so many epidemiological data, you see, asymptomatic still have a transmission, although the transmission is the viral load setting is not so high, but still have a force of transmissions. So that's why we think, in the world, we have to think about, do we need to use the 14 days to have a quarantine? Because 14 days for the inbound and outbound, so you almost spend 1 month. So this is our thought. But how can we make sure sometimes the test is not perfect? And this is actually epidemiology language, because the test is not always accurate. So sometimes you must miss the case, So you have to use the information-based technologies to improve the test and to provide information on how we can shorten, the day of the quarantine. So I work with data on Taiwan. You see, this is the models I show you, epidemiology models. From the inbound passengers from different countries, you can estimate the people who have been infected but still pre-symptomaticals and also asymptomatical. You can see the figures, but these figures is not the point I want to emphasize, but different countries have underlined different figures. The higher the figure, the higher the risk of the country they come from, So then you can also know how soon they progress from pre-symptomatical to symptomatical. So this is actually the information-based technology, to improve, to provide the testing. So I show you, next slide. I show you the very interesting figures. The Y is 100%. It's a percentage of the people, turn into the symptomatical from symptomatical phase. The X is the day of the quarantines. If you don't use the testing, the blue line show you even 5 days, the 80% already, been found because of symptom and signs. And if you use the test, you can see 5 days almost decked 100%, the 5-day quarantine can detect almost 100% case. So, you see, your policy can translate from 14 to 5 days. So it immediately shortened, more than half of the days for quarantines. Next slide, please. So I did a simulation, I did the calculations to show you if we have a strategy, you see the 3 strategies, and if you have experimental design to stratify into 3, randomize into 3 groups, the current policies, quarantine for 14 days, or test upon arrival and the 5 days for quarantine, and the test upon arrival, 15 days, the 5 days quarantine, and another test. I show you very interesting result, and this is evidence. This is information science to provide. If you use the stretch tool, test the both, only in 5 days, you can see the bottom panels. You can see nobody miss, safe. Using the data from Taiwan, from different countries, they have a different risk. You see, even high risk, you see, you haven't missed any case. So this is actually the experiment. Every country, and in every regions, you can always use the concept and model to provide information to shorten the quarantine from 14 days to 5 days, and maybe even shorter. But it depends on the risk or the virus, the virulence of the virus. So I think this is actually a very important concept to use the new technology and also information-based science to improve the quarantine policies. Next slide. So I and also my former Dean Zhang already proposed, So, like the Harold says, can COVID-19 become a barrier of the global collaboration? I don't think so. I think the COVID-19, if you use the testing, the information-based technology, share with each others, then we can have the immune passport. And this is another way of providing the collaborations, a close country with safe traveling, with also, safety journeys. Why not? So I think this is one of way, I think the COVID-19 will take into a new shape about the new concept in terms of the technologies. Digital contact tracings is also another important technical to sort out, the spread of the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-19 too, and also to be very efficient in identify those who possible to contact with the infected persons. And this is another way of using the information technology to reduce to avoid the sacrifice of the individual legal right. So this is just show you the examples. When you have a COVID-19 in the absence of symptom, but you are infectious. So how can we use the digital contact tracing to stratify the people to different level of the containment measures, from hospitalization, from the isolation, from the social distance, depends on your risk. So the lower the risk, the social distancing will be taken. Otherwise, you have to put into the hospitalization for isolation if you are sick, and if you have strongly suspected highly risk for contacting with the peoples, that you will have the isolations. So in the globe, so many countries start to develop a COVID-19 app for contact tracings. And I have to remind you of, although they are very useful, they are very efficient, as I say, this is very good, means to improve, the, the quarantine policy and also isolations, But they still have, the privacy infringement issues. So normally when we develop the app from GPS viewpoint, we can use the centralized or decentralized. And we are in the favor of the decentralized, because the decentralized sometimes can reduce the risk of the of the confidentiality, and also the data securities. And the same principle apply to if you use the Bluetooth. But the Bluetooth is better than the GPS, because the GPS know the location, but the Bluetooth does not know your location. So that's why people, are fond of using the Bluetooth to do the contact traces. I show you the two cases in Australia, Singapore, and also South Korea. They developed a social distance, the app, to alert the people when you have when you get close with the infected peoples. They will provide signal about the alerting message to you. And of course, sometimes they provide, the courtesy to say hello, and in order to not to make life, become, very friendly, So this is one of the social distance app in Australia. In UK, they also use the contact tracing app, but the difference is they use the risk stratifications, to divide the people into different risk groups in order to provide the different, the suggestion as I mentioned, social distancing, isolation, or hospitalizations. And finally, you see, because of the internet of the things, it's very popular. So people, expand the technology of contact tracing app into the bubble box. So whenever you go to the area around, then you have a smartwatch device. You can always know, how to know not to avoid, contact with the suspected infected peoples and far away from people in order not to be infected. So this is actually a smart way of the information technology to improve, we so-called the precision contact tracing and also digital with the digital technology. So I think after the COVID-19, I still believe we are still in a global village in terms of the humanities. Why? Because if we can use our smart, the technology and also our very precise information in terms of scientific principle. Yesterday, we're talking about religions and the science, and also also very play important role in the religion as well as Tim Jensen as very it's a people who strongly advocating these principles. So I think we can still have a global village. But in order to make sense come true, you have to follow in the principles people already proposed. And this is actually some of the principle has already mentioned from the Harlow speech. So I would not to repeat again for this principle, but you can see this is from the Nature, the article in the recent issues proposed. Whenever you want to use app, you have to ask the 16 questions items in order to fit with the ethical justifications. And if we can do so, you know, even the COVID-19 pandemicals, still, you know, still there. We can still have we can have a very soon to return to the new normal life, you know, with such kind of the such kind of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think this is what I want to make a contribution to health humanity in terms of the current the old policy, and also I want to update the policy in quarantine strategy, and also making use of the new technology to make, you know, the global village dream come true. And I hope if we can do that, then we can have physical meetings, you know, for our health humanity meeting soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we are going to have a 5 minutes break. After break, we'll continue to our roundtable discussion. Thank you.
很好，非常好。因为就是说现在这3次的会议呢，实践的就是以前呢，我们在 SHIPS 跟那个雅联雅联当然做。
Okay, maybe he's away for a while, and never mind. When he come back, when he come back, and then ask him to express his opinion and comment and make comment. But can I ask Bob? Did you want to make a comment, or you want some have a question for my talk and also Harold talk? Bob?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you?
Good.
Yeah.
So I thought both of the talks were impressive and unique, certainly. The sort of the interplay between the individual and the pandemic, as well as the public health imperatives of the pandemic, are sort of interesting to think about from the standpoint of the United States. We can see that the success of getting the pandemic under control has a great deal to do with the relationship between the individual and the state. And I live in a country where there's enormous tension between that. It's quite politicized, and we can see that, in fact, there is a tension between individual freedoms and the imperative of public health. So I actually live in a state that now leads the nation in new infections, a small state, but clearly we do not have it under control because many people are persuaded that it's not real, that it's not serious. And Tony, in the context of your very, very nice presentation about the potential to keep the virus under control with the kinds of controls that lead to quarantine and preventing the virus from coming into the country and leaving the country, it shows me great concern that the United States, actually, there was very good reason for other countries to close their borders to travel from the United States. So it's an interesting challenge as to whether a country can change. I mean, the United States is a very interesting country in the respect of it's always had a distrust of science. It's always had a tension with control. And in our politics, we have a cult of personality. When we were, shopping the other day at the store, all of us wearing masks, I saw a man wearing a very interesting T-shirt. It said, "Every disaster movie begins with a scientist, a government official ignoring a scientist." And I thought it was very telling about the situation we face right now.
Okay. So Bob, can I ask ask you in privacy about how did you feel about staying home for a while? How did you feel that?
I thought it was very interesting, Professor Surgeon. The discussions about contemplation, right, and about isolation. We are experiencing, I think, all of us, in the conversations with our colleagues, when you worked at home, you got a lot done. You took a day away from the office. It was quiet. You got to write. Right. And today our calendars begin with Zoom calls early in the morning and extend well into the late afternoon and early evening. If you want to write, if you need to get work done, you need to set your alarm for very, very early in the morning so you can have uninterrupted time. That seems to have become a scarce commodity. And it is a bit surreal, right? Because your only interaction with your colleagues is on the screen, just in these very, very crowded, sometimes Zoom calls. So it does take some time to adjust. My own organization has given up its headquarters. I no longer have a building to return to. So I've had to pack up my office and move everything for home. And that may actually be the way it is from this point forward.
Okay, thank you. Then can I, I think Din Zhang already back. So can I ask Din Zhang to make some comment? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting talks this morning in Taipei, and I think that's we come to this dilemma of individuality and totalities, and it's as virus is still invisible, especially more and more young symptomatic cases in all countries in the past 2 months pandemic, and that really caused a lot of tensions of the relations between people, between individuals and institutions. That pose kind of challenges to humanities. That everybody's I think is adjusting to this new normal now, as just Bob said. Unemployers without offices, but you still need to work. So what's the meaning of working, and what's the meaning of the being home and being in office, and how about this home offices? And I remember in our first conference, I mentioned in New Normal that the separation of living and working is diminishing. So the settings of our homes and our working spaces is changing now, and will be changed. So that's still evolving, and at the same time, we are facing this day-by-day needs of like intra-country travel between our homes and working locations, between our interactions with people. You need to get things done. So all these decisions we have not made before pandemic, because it's always like we make a point, we meet somewhere and we have to face, and that's the first instinct. And now that should be taken as a second or third choice. The first choice is, can we get it done through like Zoom or through telephone or like today's format? So that definitely will shape the culture of our activity, our societies in the coming months or years. And in terms of international travel, it's even more than that. Taiwan is one of the countries has a very strict border control. Everyone has to be quarantined for 14 days without testings. No, we don't have arrival testings, and we don't have testing after 14 days quarantine. And the reason we can do that is the mentality of totalities. Even though this practice will inflict, like if we quarantine 1,000 people and 999 probably don't need to go through this, and only one could be carrying virus and posing a risk to further transmissions in our society. But until now, the mentality is, well, it's right. We can infringe 999 and try to not let the one leaking out, even though scientific data say it's still leaking out from this practice, but the whole society accepts it. And we are very proud of being one of the leading democracy in Asia. a true democracy, you know, multi-parties and free speech and constitution and observing human rights. But pandemic, COVID-19 pandemics actually is changing the thinking of Taiwanese people. Say, well, we have to, if we have a threat so great that we have to sacrifice individualities to totalities. So that's we are observing now. But you know, as Tony mentions, the global village is still there. We just cannot, you know, avoid all the troubles we need. So last week we have a Minister of Health from United States, right? Secretary Azar came in, and he was the first one with a team broke the Taiwanese quarantine rules. Well, so it poses another questions. The rules set for ordinary people cannot apply to the important people that the authority define they are important. So that's kind of things that you know, initiating discussion in Taiwan, and I think this is good things. And the solution that Tony raised is testing-based approach could be more eco and could be more sustainable in the futures. But it is not practiced anywhere in the world except Iceland. They have two-tier system. One is testing-based. One is quarantines. And that's also caused some conflicts between countries. In the previous months, they did not test anyone from Denmark or Germany or Finland. And now every people came into, everyone went to Iceland has to be tested. So Denmark decided to advise their citizens not to go there because they limited the freedom of movement for Danish in Iceland. So I think this is the you know, dilemma of individuality and totality under this great threat of pandemic is great issues that we, if we can have some kind of studies, discussion, and come up with some thoughts, that would be very good for our world. So I appreciate this morning's the two very important talks that I personally learned a lot, and this is some of reflection I just had after listening to your excellent talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, I think next the next step I will ask Professor Bin Zheng to introduce, you know, Hamashida.
Yes. Huh? Yeah, Hamashida Sensei, are you still there?
You hear me?
Could we connect with?
Cannot. I'm here.
Yes. Yes, he can hear us. Sorry. Can we hear him?
Can you hear? I can hear you.
Yeah, but we can hear you, but not very clear. Yeah. So.
Hamashida, can you talk more closely to your microphone?
Yep.
Okay, I try.
Yeah, and then we could take the visual out, just so that we could hear you. I think it will be very, very valuable for us to hear your comments and questions.
I think,
can you come in now?
Yes. Two lectures very important.
Hamashida?
Very.
Yes. Okay, good. All right, go.
Two lectures are very important and very timely for us to think about the current situation, theoretically and also very practically. And one important agenda is techno-humanity. The term techno-humanity we are now facing from humanities' point of view, how to evaluate or how to communicate technology from humanities' side is very challenging topic now. Even human technology, we dare to ask technology people, how do they include the humanity part? So the techno-humanity is very, very challenging, very, very important issue. This relates to the second lecture, local community or individual issue, and society or urban society, and then environmental issue, much wider. These three different layers now correspond to virus or COVID-19. But among three, it become more and more clear. This triangle relation becomes more contradictory or controversial. So now individual person who suffered COVID-19 are very strongly attacked from local community or urban society and others without protecting their standpoint. It's very peculiar case, might be some places in Japan now. So looking at these different layers of COVID-19 appearance and also treatment, the lecture proposed the relationship between technology and ethical issue is another important issue for us to cope with in the second stage. So I am now thinking humanity should include natural science or technology or environmental issues. Otherwise, humanity, if it only set up own boundary, something like techno-history or natural history, the history part is more and more diminishing, I'm afraid. So I think for humanity part, re-establish how to include technology aspect or technology aspect, particularly through the history of technology, the responsibility of humanities. So far I'm thinking to re-establish humanity together with a sort of techno or natural or environmental issues together. That is a new agenda through COVID-19 casted to humanity studies. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Yeah, Binzhen,
Yeah.
your comment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hamashita. I got most of your points. And I'm going to use a few minutes, first of all, to thank and respond to the three commentators. And then going back to some thoughts inspired by our two speakers. I would like to begin by acknowledge the extraordinary vision that Din Zhan Changquan had, together with Tony and the Sipshin, Erinch, and colleagues 2 years ago to plan for this plenary health conference. Then, of course, none of us knew that we would be visited by this COVID-19. But it was a vision nonetheless, and therefore his response today which is extremely refreshing and sort of groundbreaking. Changquan said, we're now facing a dilemma. Well, we had a dilemma before. 2 years ago, that's what got us going about having this conference. The dilemma then, of course, include individuality and totality, the working relations between humanists, social scientists, life scientists, engineer, and so on and so forth. We thought that if we're going to look at the future of planetary health in the Earth, in a long gaze and longitudinally, then we need to resolve and develop a new working relations, as Hamashita had just concluded. So this meaningful existence, need to have, include meaningful coexistence too. Individuals could have the home office, which basically brought the post-modernity or later modernity to the situation of the early modernity. Namely, what took the industrialization, urbanization to divide people, to take people away from their homes, from the rural agricultural homestead to work in the factories. Now, after 150 years, everybody is pushed back to say that your home is your workplace, and then people should be educating your own children, not because they're not allowing to be going back. So it's a bit ironic, actually, for the historians. I mean, after all, there are marked differences between the 14th century and 21st century, to the Italians anyway. Yeah. But Tony also, posed the questions and help us to reflect together with Dr. Robert Smith, Professor Smith's comments. Okay, so if we are diehard optimists, we insist that we want to have a global village, but the lay people, some, remain unpersuaded, and the scientists have a sincere debate among themselves. Arguments, different strategies. Governments have different policies, not just among themselves, politicians, policymakers, but also with their own economists, with their own scientists, and with their own humanists. I mean, humanists were just tailing at the end. So that we are still struggling, and they have now new elites who are the authorities now. They could be data-based, lab scientists, but based on completely different philosophies and driving toward different goals and caring for different ethics. So yesterday, Professor Tim Jansen lectured to us about the history of religion, and then Zoltan reflected about ethics and arts, visual arts. When we take a long historical view on both belief systems and gratifications, and also compare with the local situation with the global, then you see that the educated citizens of the world continue to be confronted with dilemma that Dean Zhan had mentioned, that we had not arrived at the new normals because we don't know whether it's singular or plural, and whether it's hierarchical, or whether actually there will be civil liberty. This summer course, simultaneous this week, we're teaching about discrimination and prejudice. Yep. Not just racial discrimination, but cultural prejudices too. And so now I'm coming back to, join Harold's, Professor Sherson's, and Tony's, Professor Chen's duet and duo. You know, philosopher of technology in Chicago, look at the world in Chicago, presented us with wonderful citations. We enjoy the readings from Hannah Arendt, Between Past and Future, Dante's, Limbo, because this yesterday and today actually marked the first and second day of the 7th lunar calendar month, where the gate of the ghost is turning loose. And so it's a good time to think about spirituality, that Homer's Iliad, mentioning already about plague, and Martin Luther King's Dream, or Camus, or Oscar Wilde, all these people, remind us that there had always been darker moments in the past and current, no exception, perhaps in the future too. If we want to imagine that there could be a higher purposes, then we would need to admit that pride and prejudices continue. That we talked with Jansen about the game changer. It could be COVID-19, it could be something else. That Marcus Aurelius, juxtaposed with Ding Ling's diary of Miss Sophie, that Dr. Hu Shi, the May 4th Chinese Renaissance leader, Sophie is the name of Professor Chen Hengzhe, the first Chinese female professor of history, world history, at Peking University. Hu Shi named his daughter Hu Sufei, Sophie, because he dreamed of a Cornell that would bring Ithaca to China, Greater China. His father served in Taiwan. When he was 3, if you visit Academia Sinica's memorial library of Hu Shi, you saw that there's 学为人诗 that his father composed for him in his own calligraphy when Hu Shi was 3. But Sophie, Hu Shi's daughter, passed away at the age of 17 to flu and pneumonia. So what kind of plagues and people William McNeill could have us to think about? We debated about the issue of the human right to live, but could it be posed together with the right to let live of the viruses? None of these things would have easy answers, because humanities and art, when brought together with social sciences and life sciences, epidemiologists, brilliant ones, such as Tony, or other health scientists, visionaries, such as Dean Zhan, they are eager to, and they had been working together with us to imagine that there will be an occasion to have a seminar on plenary health. We're still talking about that. I think this morning, Tony and I were thinking about how to finally create that occasion when the moments are right. But I want to also share with you, the preparations ANHN and SHIPS had done together. 3 years ago in Liège, we presented a Health and Humanities joint panel called A Fair Society Across Arts and Sciences. Harold was there. The 3 panelists included Professor Tony Zhang Dongliang, then Dean Chen Weijian from this College of Public Health, Professor Sebastian Liao, who was here, and also Huang Xingya, the discussant, who represented most Ministry of Science and Technology as a commentator. The question we asked, the theme of that panel is called A Fair Society Across Arts and Sciences. Would arts and sciences and humanities and life sciences eventually be dreaming the same dreams? I posed that question at the end of the discussion in April. Are we one team or are we different teams? Are we fighting together if we are struggling, or are we struggling with each other with different dreams and sleeping on the same bed in Chinese, they say, and dreaming different dreams, and waking up, right, heading to different directions. If you are in Taipei or anywhere else, you will see that. But we asked that question because Louis Ostbeck and Janssen team are organizing the joint sessions in December in Odense and May in Lisbon for the European Humanities Conference. I hope all of us would have the aspiration to be there. And we started to think about our summer course theme for next summertime. So there are two themes. Tony thought that to have a discussion, education about evolving culture in the changing environment, as Hamashita had pointed out, would be meaningful. Although others also would like to have a discussion about the right to play in modern times. Because of the isolation, segregation, and unavoidable depression. So Stoics or Aristotle or Mencius could continue to help us to think about philosophical mental existence as opposed to biophysical experiences. Existentialist, utilitarianist would tell us about tech humanities. Hamashita just now pointed out one thing that we need to think more is that there could be a something that's called ecological humanities or technological humanities that Peng Qinglong in October helped us to unleash. Shanghai Jiao Tong now is publishing their journal, international journal in English of tech humanities. We will see contributions from colleagues all around. Let me come to Tony's brilliant and thoughtful presentation for a moment. He began by pointing out the issues and the questions of value and dignity in the face of quarantine, isolation, and contact tracing. Where is humanities in the midst of all these necessities? Tony came to us with his training in dentistry, but then, his education in Cambridge in epidemiology and biostatistics restores something that only a 700 years of institutional education such as Cambridge or Oxford could bring on board to nurture. That is, when we have border control, we could think not only of mitigation now in April and June or March, but also 14th century Italy. So there's longer memories. People who are still in the Latin world of quarantine and isolation versus people with shorter memories, quickly acting in Taiwan, Hong Kong from 17 years ago. I mean, we were fortunate that we had this shorter memory because people in US and Europe now are getting their truly, truly contemporary memory. All right, so 14 days or 40 days. Open the border, school, or lockdown. I mean, now we're about to, be at the 400 day time marker. Where are the individuals and the global communities? Populations at risk every day, Bill Gates asked us, if we put the number of people who die of diseases and those who die of poverty, depletion, that's the case, from Greece to Roman times, to the Black Death, to Spanish flu, to Manchuria plague, Hong Kong plague, and on and on. The uncertainty in life compelled us that, as Hamashita said, if we are thinking that this is one of the important moments, allow me to share with you that Hamashita doesn't choose his words very carefully. If you're in his comment, think that doing something very important. ANHN and SHIP is my 95-year-old father. So all of us testimonies to the short-term goals, the immediate crisis and challenges, the rules and regulations, whether they're sensible or not, excessive or not. We really could agree that we could aim high, but really need to remain human. When we have Mr. Science and Mr. Democracy being with us together, the May 4th dream, 400 years, for all we call the Cynic world, Greater China, including overseas Chinese people, for over 70 million of them. I feel that when I talk with my colleagues all around, they say that global humanities now is taking a midterm exam. That this is our quiz. Quiz usually came, you could prepare all the quizzes, but you're going to be tested by something that you had not been quite prepared well, that memorization and other things, information-based, perhaps, at a micro level or a macro level, could not prepare you quite well. I want to congratulate this series of online meetings, because we're moving on to something else, because they brought something of fantastic quality. This is cutting edge health sciences and cutting edge humanities. They are debates because they are not trying to water down, present you with diluted disciplinary research or teaching. They would encourage our young students in this room helping us. We're extremely grateful to them, to have double majors in life, to be bifocal and multidisciplinary, to be updated always in the academy, and then so that when we may be gifted with immune passports, that we will remain citizens of the world. Next week, September the 5th, this same group will present a online meeting with our friend Shohan Lim, who's already teaching in NUS Singapore about cupping and acupuncture. So there are many, many subjects, namely, that we had not been able to cover about traditional Chinese medicine, but also traditional, Arabic or Tibetan medicine, ethnic traditions in Africa or Latin America. I'm sorry I had indulged myself, but I'm going to stop here and allow others to continue. Thank you very much for giving us this extremely rich and wonderful morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for Binzhen, always, giving us a very, I think, very valuable comment on both speech and also others, joined the comment, including Hamashita. I think Hello, can you just respond to? Would you like to respond in a brief way? Yeah, please. Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, the issues that I heard raised in the roundtable discussion by several talked about the various kinds of relationships of technology to humans, and I think that we need to be mindful of a very important distinction. One, we often think of technology the way we think about tools. We use technology for our purposes, and technology empowers us to do things more effectively, more efficiently, with more precision, and so on. But that they are essentially just extensions of our own actions, and we are in utter control of them, and we determine what they're going to do, and we can use them for other purposes. Another view of technology is that technology drives us more than we realize. And when I was alluding to some recent thinking in what I'm calling the techno-humanities movement, which is closely allied with, as I think you all recognize, with sort of post-humanist thinking, the assumption is that really there's a degree of autonomy and agency and so on that we find in technology. Now, a simple way to characterize this is to think back to some of the classic stories, most famous being Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because there the idea was that the monster that Dr. Frankenstein created was a monster because and only because it lacked humanity. But then toward the end of the book, it became evident that in fact it did have signs of humanity, signs of compassion, and signs of loyalty, and signs of fidelity, and so on and so forth. But from the human side, that wasn't accepted or believed, and so he was sacrificed and not given his ultimate wish. And so this is what I think is a crucial area for humanities research, and it of course connects to issues of ecology and climate. Of course, connects to issues of how we as humanists understand technology. But I think that we need to recognize that there's not one story of technology. I think we need to recognize that scientists are not of one mind. After the discovery of the structure of DNA by James Watson and I forget his name, the sort of biological community really radically split into what we call molecular biology these days and evolutionary or organismic biology on the other hand. And they have radically different approaches to what they're doing, what's valid, and so on and so forth. So this really is a challenge, and we really need to, for the sake of, whatever the future of humanity is and whatever our relationship to machines will be, it's really something that I think has got to be on the top of the list of humanist scholars. What I was trying to suggest was that when we look back, at the traditional texts of the humanities, and we love them and we reflect on them and we dissect them and so on, but that may not be enough. We have to figure out how can we use the kind of robust knowledge and insights that we've gained from this in ways that embrace the challenges of our day. And I think COVID-19 is really exacerbating those challenges in ways that draw attention to this issue.
Thank you, Harold. I think the last point is very important. I think we need to incorporate updated and also the new knowledge about the things which we are unknown, over the past decade. But I should say, I take the also the viewpoint from Binzhen is we have to transcend, the traditional philosophy into the new technology rather than only follow, the things like the usual, the new technology. Anyway, I think time is approaching to time, to go to end. I know right now it's very late evening in the USA, so I will close very soon, and first of all, thank you so much for Binzhen sharing with her, the doctor experience in our isolation and quarantine service. I think this is actually for my talk. I really want everyone in the world to know, the quarantine and isolation is not an easy job. It's not such kind of things. Is you quarantine and you need isolation. It's not something like that. So I think this is very practical. So I enjoy with such kind of the sharing with this experience. I hope every government and every policymakers can understand this from health humility viewpoint and to take this into account and improve their policy, based on we so-called the scientific evidence-based, philosophy and the new technology. So finally, I think overall, I have to say, from our dean and also Hamasida and also Rob Smith and also Binzhen and also Harold and me, I think actually from the beginning, our meeting on health humanity start from the health, the planetary health, and also which I think this is very important because the Sustainable Development Goal from WHO is always, the one of the goal of our health humanity, in the pursuit of this goal is always our health humanity, the target. So I would like to say we still have a lot of texts, as Harold say, the traditional humanity text may be not enough. That's why we propose planetary health, because of the Din Zhang and also Sustainable Development Goal. Today you can see COVID-19, after COVID-19 pandemic, I believe they would have a strong impact on, the SDG, the goal, and also the planetary health. We still have a lot not to be discussed, not to be elucidated. For example, whether and how the COVID-19 changed the environmentals, the atmosphere or environmental, the space. And this is one of the big topicals, we are going to, prepare also in the following series of online meeting with our Din Zhang and also other people involved in the health immunity, particularly in association with the planetary health, So I still think, in order to reach the global village, we have to change the concept about the SDG and also planetary health, And I think this is also right now the challenging job from WHO and all other policymakers right now, when they want to pursue the health for the peoples. So general comment, I would like to say, I hope, our online meeting, also the physical meeting can continue, to follow the principle of the SIP and also the Asian New Humanity principles. And I and our Din Zhang, we would make every effort to facilitate, to help health humanity go toward the new directions after COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, I think this is all the comment, and I think right now it's 11:10. It's just the time, for finishing the online meetings. So can we take a photo? Then we then we say goodbye and say farewell. Yeah. Yeah. So can everyone get on the web and we take a photo, group from the web now? Yeah.
Yep, so we come to the end of the session. So everyone, please turn on your cameras. Don't forget we have to take the very good pictures.
People from the other room, are they joining us?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Is Hamashita still there?
Hamashita,
Yes.
can we?
Yes.
Can you
see
get
me?
on?
No.
Hamashita Sensei,
Yes, I'm here. But
can you switch on your camera?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Hooray.
I take a photo. Yeah.
All of you should be in the back.
Yeah.
In this room.
Just come. Just come.
Please.
Yeah. Quick. Quick. Yeah.
You could see we have been helped by so many wonderful graduate students. They're not just from Taiwan. One is from Thailand. Paul, you want to raise your hand? They represented East Asia, Southeast Asia, and with you, this is our global village.
Yeah. Yeah. We also have participants from the South Asian country as well. We don't have time to introduce them. Yeah. Then take photo. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Bye bye. See you next time. Yeah.
Excellent. I brought you some chips. You could have your chips.